This barn was built in about 1885. It's the second barn on this property, but more on that later. Let's take a look around first. The house was built in 1880 in time for a wedding. Let's take a look at that a little bit later too. Let's walk in the front door of the barn and let's see if we can learn a little history of the family. Let's take a quick short version of the history of this barn. I'm Ken Rogner, and I'm the fourth generation living on this farm, utilizing this barn. Son Chris is next door, he's fifth, and Justin next door is sixth generation. More on that later. The story starts in 1852 when Michael Adam Rogner, who's 17 years old at the time, comes from Bavaria with his parents and some of his siblings and settles in Frankenmuth. He gets married, has 13 kids, and in 1875 buys 80 acres of forest here in Denmark Township near Richville, and puts his two oldest boys on it. They're 16 and 17. You can see some of the tools that ended up getting used as that 16 and 17-year-old started to clear the land and turn this into a farm. The younger of those two is my great-grandfather. By 1885, the younger brother, George Michael, who always went by Mike, bought out John Adam, his older brother's share, and then married Elizabeth Reinert. Shortly before that, he had built the house that we saw a few minutes ago. Mike and Lizzie had two boys, Henry and William, and 8 girls. Eventually, Bill, who had helped develop everything, here are some of the tools that were used in the construction of this barn. Bill, who is the second brother, eventually buys this farm from his dad, and that's 2 years after Henry, the older brother, moves out, and he buys another farm, builds another house about a mile away. Bill's history is an interesting one in as much as when he's about 21 years old, he loses his right arm, he's right-handed, loses his right arm in a farm accident, and spends the rest of his life with a hook that he fashioned himself. Some of the tools he used to build that are here. And photos. All of the Rogner boys were trumpet players, including Bill. So Bill learned to play a cornet because it was lighter and learned to play it with his left hand and actually spent quite a bit of time in different bands, along with his brother and his cousins who also lived in the area. Interesting here that the barn, when it was built, some of the neighbors over the years signed their names onto the wood. So Reinhold is here and Adolf is here and a bunch of folks that were involved. Bands were a popular and important part of life in rural America in those days, and this was the Denmark Township Farmers Band, which included Bill, his brother, his cousin, included the local school teacher who happened to be my father's teacher and even my teacher in the one-room country school that we all attended and that I started in. My dad also was a trumpet player, and when we get to Earhart's generation, he is the only son of Bill and Katie. Some images here show Katie's family. Katie was born in Russia, my grandmother, and came to this country at the turn of the century. New Year's Eve, 1990. New Year's Eve, 1890. Was a worker in the field, a field worker. Her family did. They lived in Montana originally and worked in the fields, and that's how she met my grandfather. The house that we saw earlier was the original house built by Mike Rogner and then bought by Bill Rogner. And at one point or another, there were always two families. The younger family would live on the second floor, the parents on the first floor. And then in both cases, or in all the cases, eventually as children came along, mom and dad would move out and the kids would take over the bedroom on the first floor and their kids would be on the second floor. The house originally had a summer kitchen that Bill and Katie had only one son, and also a dog. There was always a dog, but that's Earhart sitting on the lawn with his parents. Notice there's a full width porch on the front of the house. My parents, Earhart and Helen, eventually cut that down to make it more contemporary in a smaller porch. Earhart and Helen had 3 kids, myself on the left, my brother Ben on the right, my sister Kathleen next to Ben. And all of us grew up on this farm until we were about 18. Ben went off to Chicago, Kathleen went off to Dallas, Texas, and Ken lived in different places, got married, moved to Frankenmuth, moved back here a few years ago. I think the Rogner men are most famous for never throwing anything away. So all of the things that had collected in the barn over the years, I have put to use as a part of a museum for my grandkids. Here's a photo that shows my grandfather at the wheel of the 1908 Buick, the family car, my great-grandfather, Mike, standing on the running board, and my grandfather's 3 sisters in the back seat. Photo was taken in Richville. And I've saved the license plate from that car, as well as a collection of license plates from Michigan, all the years beginning in 1910 up to the present. There's also a bunch of interesting memorabilia and newer license plates and things that all just have particular meaning to my family. There's some equipment here. There's a fanning mill. There's a corn sheller. There's a bean picker. All of these were tools that were used here on the Rogner farm. Horseshoes from the early days, a stove that my mother always loved in the kitchen, a cream separator, miscellaneous tools, obviously a collection of pitchforks from wrought to formed, shovel collection, just everything that never got thrown away by anybody in this family. From whether there's a dynamite box, because that's how stumps were cleared, egg baskets, a little hand cultivator, a bottle capper, sprinkling can, big coffee pot for when the thrashers were here. One corner of the barn is dedicated to my grandfather on my mother's side, Mike Denzer, who was a businessman, a butcher, an auctioneer, a local businessman, became the mayor of Reese, which is the next closest town, 3 miles away. And this includes the bicycle he rode around town with, the penny scale that was out in front of his business for years, sausage makers, he was a butcher, and various and sundry different tools and items that came from that side of the family. He was an avid hunter and fisherman, and even some of those items are here. In the butcher shop, he sold pin conning cheeses, which came in a big wooden crate like this, wrapping paper, various and sundry different items. The rifle that he used to hunt that deer with, that he mounted later on. All the beams are hand-hewn, were done by the people who built the barn, by my great-grandfather and his brother.